What is going on, everyone? This is Miles Dompier, and welcome to Xbox Chaturdays, episode 86. Today, I am stoked to be joined by modern vintage gamer. How are you doing on this fine Saturday, my dude?
Hello, Miles. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on, and I appreciate you asking me to come on your show. Like I don't go around saying to podcasts, why don't you have me on the show? Because I don't feel like that's appropriate. But I do love the fact that you reached out to me a couple of weeks ago and said, "Hey, I'd love to have you on," because I really like the stuff that you do on social media and YouTube and stuff. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
I'm stoked to have you on. Yeah, I reached out a little while back. I'm a big fan of your content. For folks who are unaware, MVG has a great YouTube channel that dives deep into tech, hardware, software, a lot of retro stuff that I love. You're also in the development world as well. You're currently working at Limited Run Games. So I'm
Yes.
excited to get your prospects and your insights because there have been a lot of industry developments this week, and it's important to get some context. We all have our opinions, our thoughts, and it's nice to get some balanced perspective, when it matters. So I'm excited to have you on. I'm grateful you're joining me on my little show here. Um,
Thank you.
some quick housekeeping before we get into the show today, get into your introduction proper. As you may have noticed, things are a little different over here at Xbox Chaturdays. If you're watching the show live, you may have noticed the channel has changed. We are no longer streaming on youtube.com/Windows Central Gaming. We are streaming on youtube.com/Miles Dompier. And I have started my own little channel. We've migrated Xbox Chaturdays over there, so I'm grateful for all the folks who are joining us. If this is your first time, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. If you're a returning fan, appreciate you. Appreciate you joining me as we make this transition. So there's been a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes. Won't really get into all of that. But the long and short is I have Xbox Chaturdays over here, which I'm grateful for. I'm grateful for everyone who watches, listens, and all of that. As I work towards, solidifying this channel, growing this channel, things are going to be a little different in terms of super chats, which was a big part of the show, the community interaction. I'll still be monitoring the chat, trying to pull questions where I can. In the interim, I dropped a link in the chat. If you want to have a, quote, super chat for now, go to, here's a link, streamlabs.com/milesdompier/tip. I'll drop that in the chat again for the people watching live. And if you're not watching live and listening on audio services, appreciate you. For you, things won't change really at all. The audio versions will stay where they've been. That's all good there. All right.
Awesome. One thing. Hit up Miles with a like in this, and hit him up with a sub as well. I just subscribed to the channel, so if you haven't subscribed, hit that subscription button. Get on
Appreciate you. Yeah, it's only been going for about a week and a half. I have a decent number of people joining me over there. Huge shout out to all the kind words and support. It's been really cool. Means a lot. I've had a lot of people saying, "Why don't you do your own channel? Why don't you do your own thing?" And I'm like, nobody cares. Nobody wants to see me do my own thing. I got Windows Central. And then I pushed it off for a while, and eventually I was like, you know what? All right, let's do it. Let's
that.
do it. Let's see what happens. And it's been so cool to have people be like, all right, let's go. Let's do this. And so, yeah, obviously appreciate everyone coming along for the ride. And we have a lot to talk about today for this episode, this fresh episode. As you've seen, I've refreshed the overlays. I've refreshed some things about the show, trying to, make sure Xbox Chaturdays 2.0 is nice and special. So we're going to be talking about the latest comments from Phil Spencer on the Activision Blizzard King acquisition, Xbox's plans for mobile gaming, some drama surrounding Bethesda, why Project Keystone was scrapped, the Game Awards nominees, and a whole bunch more. But first, MVG. For the people who maybe don't know, let everyone know who you are, where they can find you, and why you love gaming.
Oh man, tough question. Straight up,
The Holy
Miles.
Trinity.
Yeah,
Let's go.
yeah, right.
Just getting straight into it.
So yeah, I'm MVG. My real name is Demetrius. I am a game developer. I work at Limited Run Games. I was previously at Night Dive Studios, so I have video game experience as a developer. As Miles mentioned, I'm also a YouTuber running the channel Modern Vintage Game. I have 700 and something thousand subs right now. I do weekly videos every Monday. I'm doing some YouTube shorts as well, which is I'm kind of messing around with that. But yeah, I love gaming because I think it was something that was instilled into me from a very young age. When I was, I think, about 8 or 9 years old, my dad kind of came home from work one day and just plonked a Commodore 64 on my desk and said, Figure this out. This is a computer. This is a new thing. This is cool. This could be interesting." And it kind of just went from there, man. Like I started playing games from a very young age, and I've always been a gamer. Um, throughout the generations, from the early days of the 8-bit micros to today, and I will continue to do so as long as I can. So, again, thanks for having me on, Miles. It's a pleasure to be here.
I really appreciate it. You're someone I've followed for a while. I love your channel. I love a lot of your content that you do over there. So I'm excited to have you on. And again, I do really appreciate your insights to everything, because like you said, you've worked on games, you've worked with platforms, you understand more than the average person on Twitter about how some of that works. So how I want to start the show today is I want to get your take on basically the state of current gen, because we've
Mhm.
had a lot of questions in recent weeks about performance, capabilities of hardware, platforms. We've had Gotham Knights, a next gen or current gen only title on console, not being able to exceed 30 FPS. We've had a Plague Tale Requiem, another current gen only title, failing to hit above 40 FPS. We've had Pokemon Scarlet and Violet running on the Switch. Not well. Not well. I'm a big Pokemon fan. You guys know I love Pokemon. Some of you wish I would never talk about Pokemon, but I love it. All right, I do. I've been playing it, and who mama? Oh, I'm going to be making a video about some of the weird stuff that I've discovered in the game. Some of it's just funny because it's just so bad and so weird that it reminds me of the early day, like launch Skyrim, where some of that stuff was just so janky and so weird. But it wasn't game breaking. It was just hilarious. But there's been a lot of questions about, is the hardware we currently have going to be enough for the future? So you kind of did a video on this recently that I think you did an amazing job of talking about the pros and cons of each platform when it comes to putting out a game on these platforms and working with these dev kits. So,
Mhm.
in your experience, what are the pros and cons of working on a PlayStation dev kit, a Nintendo dev kit, and an Xbox dev kit?
Well, it's a good question, Miles. I think the best way to answer that is all of them right now are good dev kits to work with. The tools that they provide and the documentation around, for the most part, is excellent. I think all three of them know that making games is difficult, and they try to provide the best possible way for you to succeed in making games. Um, the Switch is a good one where I will say that they've made it very accessible for smaller studios, indies, one person development studios to make games, and that was not always the case in the past with the bad old days of. And I didn't make games on the Wii U or the Wii, so I'm only I guess for what I've heard from other people that I know, but it was not a great environment, to make games on. So Nintendo's really done a lot of homework making sure that they give developers the tools that they need, and all three of them do. So I guess the pros for me is they the hardware is good to work with. The support around the games that you make is good. If you need some help or some documentation in general, it's pretty good. I guess the negatives, though, which is a good question because we don't really talk about that as much. But the negatives, I think, it's really not. I guess it's not really a negative in the traditional sense, but it's more a case of when you get a new console, because we're talking about the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series S and X, they're still relatively new. I mean, I know that they just they all hit 2 years just recently, right? But I guess in a development sense, that's still pretty early. Um, and one of the things that I found some pain with was just kind of learning some of the new features of the new hardware. So, for example, on the Xbox, right? How do you do 120 hertz? I mean, it's easier to say, oh, you just flick that switch and everything is 120 hertz, but it doesn't work like that. The same applies for the PlayStation. Haptic feedback on the controller. How does that even? Where do you start with that, right? Like you know what you're trying to accomplish, but how do you get there? And that's something that I feel like while the hardware makers have done a good job in basically advocating for you to or pushing you to start using those features, they don't always give you the appropriate documentation or code samples or whatever for you to actually get there. So there's usually some type of back and forth where you're sitting in support tickets or something to get what you need. But ultimately, look, I think making games in 2022 with modern dev kits is so much easier than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. We've heard horror stories of how hard it was to make games on the PlayStation 3, for example, and the Xbox 360 was difficult initially, and just stuff like that. Those days seem like they're way behind us now. I think it's a lot more easy. It's a lot more streamlined to make games for. And like I said, I'm pretty happy with the current state of dev kits across all platforms.
Yeah, it's interesting as we look towards comments like that suggest that, yeah, it is easier than ever before to develop a game. But I think it's still important to note that that doesn't mean it's easy overall to develop a
Right.
game. Because one thing that I have learned as I've talked to more and more developers is that the little things that you like talking about 30 FPS versus 60 FPS or 60 FPS versus 120 FPS. There is this kind of misconception that, yeah, you flip a switch and things are good. Frame rate's
Yeah.
doubled, you're good to go. When I had Jason Ronald on the show, when I was talking to him about FPS boost, which a lot of people are like, oh, okay, it's just something that uncaps the frame rate. And no, that's not the reality of how that tech works. You have to go in, especially when we talked about Dark Souls 3. They had to go zone by zone, region by region, and adjust a whole series of parameters just to ensure that that boost to frame rate didn't completely destroy all of the animations in a zone. And so
Yeah.
that's the kind of level, and that's the kind of thing that people have to pay attention to when we talk about 30 versus 60 FPS. So
Mhm.
when we talk about 30 versus 60 FPS, when we look at current gen games like Gotham Knights, for as the infamous recent example, do you have any concerns about the hardware capabilities of the PS5, Xbox Series S, and Xbox Series X right now as we move towards what's next?
Honestly, I don't. There was a narrative that the Series S was, that whole narrative about the Series S holding next generation back. I
Uh-huh.
think that's absolutely absurd. Take it from me, anyone that's listening, that just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Like, it's really, if you take the example of Gotham Knights, and you mentioned Pokemon earlier, and Plague Tale, the common thing with all these games is there is a push from the publisher to ensure that these games come out at the time that they want them to. And in some instances, game delays are just not negotiable, right? So basically, developers are doing the best they can to deliver an experience which is good enough, I will say. Uh, but look, I don't subscribe to the fact that the Series S is holding next gen back. In fact, if you look at Gotham Knights, I believe it runs better on the Series S than it does on the
I think
Series
there's a
X.
more consistent frame rate. Yeah.
So, I mean, that alone should just completely snuff out any notion that the Series S is holding next generation back. It's really just a matter of, look, developers don't want to make a game for the Series X and then be like, well, now we have to make sure it runs well on the Series S. They don't want to deal with two SKUs, but unfortunately, that's the situation we're in. And you have that's if you're going to make a game for the Xbox, then you have to cover both those platforms. And that's just the reality of the situation. It's not something developers like. And I think there is some frustration from devs out there that they don't want to drop specifications. I mean, if you've got a system that has 16 gigabytes of memory, and then you move over to one that has 8, and if you have one that has a very powerful GPU, and you move over to one that has a much weaker GPU, no developer is going to be like, yeah, let's do
I
this.
love
This is going to
that.
be
That's
great.
sick.
Everyone's going to be like, okay, well, let's get the Series S version out now. And I think that's ultimately the end result of this. It's just there is a lot more work that needs to be done. You're not focused on one target. You're focused on two, and I think that's kind of the reality of what we're talking about here versus any notion that a Series S is holding back next gen.
And I think that's really important. The timelines that you touch on. When we look at console versions of games, when we look at publisher developer relationships, the reality is that at a certain point, the publisher wants the game out or needs the game out.
Yep.
And that is going to ultimately determine how optimized all of these versions can be. And at a certain
Mhm.
point, there are probably hard conversations behind the scenes that say, we have to hit this deadline. What do we need to cut feature-wise that we can ensure that this game ships? And then with stuff like Gotham Knight, it was probably 60 FPS. It probably wanted to offer a performance mode. There might potentially be a performance mode offered down the road, but when it comes to that launch window, that launch timing, the conversation with the publisher, it just wasn't feasible. And Pokemon, another example of Game Freak, they put out 2 games per year, or this year.
Yeah.
Pokemon Legends Arceus, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Clearly, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, the most ambitious project that they've ever done. But that being said, yeah, they weren't going to miss that holiday window.
Definitely
The Pokemon
not.
company wasn't going to be like, all right, well, I guess we can just wait until the holidays. We need to sell Switches, but we can just wait. That's fine. That wasn't the conversation.
Well, I mean, also consider the marketing as well, like all the merchandise around it, right? Like, I mean, you can't just up and delay the game. I mean, look at Halo Infinite when they delayed that game. Do you remember they had Halo Infinite on the box of the Xbox, right? They had Doritos and Mountain Dew. They had all this
Yep.
stuff ready to go. And honestly, I mean, we haven't really spoken about it, but imagine how embarrassing that would have been for Xbox. That's just completely embarrassing for the brand that happened, right? I mean, they mitigate it and they handle it very well, and I give them credit for it. But you know, no one wants to do that. No one wants to delay anything. But unfortunately, you know, that's how things go in video games. Publishers, when they put their foot down and say, look, it has to be ready for the holiday, developers are going to do whatever it takes to make sure that the game doesn't fall over on day one.
Yeah, and that's kind of the unfortunate reality here. So when we talk about, the Series S, quote, holding back next gen, I think realistically what it is the Series S is maybe the last version that gets optimized, and it probably gets the least amount of optimization. They get it running,
Yep.
they get it out at launch, and that's why we saw with Dying Light 2, a couple
Yeah.
months after launch, there was the performance update because
Yeah,
they had...
runs at 60, right? Like they
Yeah,
ended up patching it and fixing it. Cyberpunk was the same. Like eventually patches will come out that will address the concerns that people are having. And again, it just comes down to you have to meet this date. You have to meet this target date. And now it's like, okay, now that we've shipped the game, now go and fix it and actually make it work properly. And you know, that's kind of video games in 2022. That's what we do, you know.
yeah, that's just kind of the cold, hard reality of the business side. Because again,
Mhm.
I'm a big advocate of, if your team is telling you they need more time, they need more resources, give it to them. It'll be a better product at the end of the day. People will be more excited about it. But then I also understand it's not my money. I'm not the one investing millions of dollars and having to juggle these deadlines for what's next and having to make sure this game comes out so we can afford the next game. Like those aren't that's not what I'm thinking about as a player of these games. I'm thinking about the development team, what they want. I'm thinking about the development team when they have to put out something that they know isn't performing the way that people want and then have to deal with the backlash and feedback. That's who I'm thinking about. But again, I understand it's a lot more complicated. There's the business factor that unfortunately dictates a lot of these decisions.
Yep,
So,
spot on.
quick shout out to everyone who's joining us live. I see some folks in the chat. Blue Moon is saying that it's not showing up in the YouTube feed. Yes, this is the first live stream ever on this channel, so it's probably not showing up in a lot of feeds. You're probably coming here via Twitter. So again, if you're new, digging the show, I don't like to talk about the algorithm, but yeah, you have to like the video, subscribe, share it out, all of that good stuff. But because this is the inaugural live stream on this channel, it's not going to pop up in a lot of feeds, I don't imagine.
Hit that like button. We got 28 likes and 42 people.
Let's get a
Click on that.
100% ratio for
Yeah.
the first time ever in YouTube history.
Click on that thumbs up.
All right, so the burning question here before we move on from this topic. Are we getting mid-gen refreshes? Do you think that is a realistic possibility when we look at Xbox's series model? Because I've talked about this in the past, how I think they've implemented the series model to be more in line with phones. So they can do the X2, the S2, S Pro, S Ultra, whatever they decide to do. I think that's specifically the reason that they dropped the series moniker. Do you think we're getting mid-gen refreshes for PlayStation and Xbox within the next couple of years?
No, I don't. I don't think there's really a reason to have mid-gen refreshes. And if we go back and look at the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X, the reason why those systems came out was because of the emergence of 4K televisions, right? So there was a big push for 4K. Now, I know 8K is a thing, and you can buy some 8K displays now, but look, the reality is we're nowhere near targeting 8K for video games. We haven't mastered 4K 60 yet. Now you could
No.
argue that a mid-gen refresh would kind of lock on that 4K 60 um, target that we're looking for, but even I don't think that's enough for hardware makers to say, we need to give developers, a little bit more power. Look, I mean, in many ways, Miles, to me, it feels like this generation has barely started because everything that we've seen so far is mostly cross generational. Obviously, Sony has some exclusives as well. Microsoft will come out with some next year. But up until this point, it just feels like we're still kind of stuck in, this kind of cross generational thing. So the notion of a mid gen refresh is just hard for me to really kind of get my head around. I don't think there's a reason for it, and I don't think that developers are really looking for that right now. And I also want to say that on the consumer side, it's a very hard pill to swallow to to ask your customer base to now move on to this kind of half iteration of a generation of a new piece of hardware when number one we've had so many supply chain issues over the last few years. It's still, I mean, you can pretty much buy a Series S anywhere these days. Series X's are getting better as far as availability, but they're not, it's certainly not I can log on to Amazon right now and order one and have it tomorrow. That's there's still, you still have to kind of jump through hoops to find one. PS5s, as you know, are still pretty much impossible to find. I mean, they come up a lot more regularly on websites and the PlayStation Direct store and all that stuff. You can get one, but look, I don't see there's any real use case for a mid-gen refresh at this time. I think developers are still learning about the Series S, Series X, and the PS5 hardware. We haven't really seen any true next-gen experience, I want to say. And I think that will change over the next few years. But let's get some games out first, before we talk about what's next, because right now we're still stuck in that kind of cross-generational thing.
I think that's beautifully said. This generation, even if there were potentially plans already in place to have maybe a mid-gen refresh as things got going, this generation has been so delayed in terms of development, in terms of the cadence for these games releasing. The whole 2020 situation that has fundamentally disrupted a lot of plans that were maybe happening behind the scenes, especially on
Yeah.
the game development side. So, as you said, we haven't even seen many games that have been developed with new dev kits. We've The fraction of games that have been actually developed from the ground up with new dev kits in mind is next to nothing. Almost no game has released that was made for current gen consoles. It's just the reality. So we're still waiting for that push. As we've seen, PlayStation, they got memed on because Jim Ryan came out and said, "We believe in generations and our games are exclusive." And then most of their games, as we've seen, you can run them on PS4. Let's be real.
Yeah.
They
Yep.
can, and they have released them on PS4 because fundamentally what they're developing for hasn't changed, because this was in development during the PS4 era, during the Xbox One era, and they're, obviously updating it and enhancing it where they can, but it wasn't made for these new consoles. So a lot of these dev kits haven't even been tapped into at all. Xbox Velocity architecture, and that's something that I've been asking of developers about, because they talk about the feature, they talk about what you can do. I don't know of a single game that's really used it in a sense that impacts the gameplay, because obviously it can impact load speed. But when you watch the tech demo and they pan around the screen and you see all of the textures instantly there in incredibly high resolution, and in the background it's not rendering any textures really at all to give you maximum bandwidth. I don't know if you've heard of anyone using it, but I haven't heard of a single game using that technology.
No, not at least not at the moment. But I think there are probably some studios that are messing around with it right now. But no, I don't know of anyone that's actually using it officially at this time.
So yeah, there's a lot of untapped potential in these dev kits. So
Yeah.
I know the PS4 or PS5 Pro rumors have been circulating since before the PS5 launched, but I'm not expecting it.
Yeah, I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, I would ask you, what would you think a PS5 Pro would look like? I mean, what would it offer that the current model doesn't, other than maybe a nicer looking case? Because
I was gonna say a form factor that isn't kind of
yeah,
disgusting. Like,
yeah, maybe a slimmer version. I mean, I could see a PS5 Slim come out where they, because
yes,
PlayStation they when you look at their previous hardware, they iterate over the shell design, and they reduce down and they shrink down the motherboard size and the chips and everything like that. I could definitely see that, where the next main update is cooler, runs with less power. It's smaller, it's more compact. I could definitely see that, but I don't really see a change in specs. For quite a while.
I mean, the PS4 Slim, that's a sexy console. That thing is slick. I love the
I like
design
it.
of that.
Yeah, they
And
should
so,
do that.
yeah, do that again. Do this string, because I have my PS5 over here. It's massive. It's like low to the ground. It's almost as tall as my computer tower. It's a beast.
It
Like,
is. Yes.
it's a great console, but the shell of it is it's a little
Yeah.
comical. All right, just being real here. It's a strange looking console. It kind of reminds me of the weird prototypes that you would see. Like, all right, this is what this like the original Xbox, the big stupid shiny X. They were
Yeah.
never going to release that. That's kind of what this reminds me of. Like a cool, all right, it's going to look like a space station. It's going to look like something from the future. And then they're like, we need to just put it out. This is what it's going to look like. Here you go. All right, MVG, we got to talk a little bit about some drama that's been exploding on social media. To get everyone up to speed, this involves Mick Gordon, the composer of Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal, and Bethesda. There have been some ugly developments. There's been a public spat about, whose fault it is that the Doom Eternal soundtrack wasn't out. So strap in. There's a lot of stuff to go over, but I'm going to give you a brief overview of the situation here. So in 2020, the producer of Doom Eternal, Mark Stratton, posted an open letter on Reddit explaining why the soundtrack for Doom Eternal was delayed. Stratton accused Gordon of missing deadlines and misguiding fans with his social media posts. And that came out. That was a big deal. I remember people basically blaming Mick Gordon in a public space for the delay. People were upset. And then nearly 2 years later, in recent history, Mick Gordon has dropped a Medium post detailing his side of the story and posting that Stratton used quote, disinformation and innuendo to unfairly place the blame on Mick Gordon for the soundtrack not shipping. Mick Gordon also stated that the tight deadline for development for Doom Eternal required finalizing music months before the gameplay and combat was even finished. And then tensions ultimately came to a head here when Bethesda announced in 2019 that the special edition would come with the soundtrack by Mick Gordon. Mick Gordon says he was never, at that point in time, he was never even approached about producing a full soundtrack for Doom Eternal. So he is claiming that Bethesda came out on stage at E3 and said that you get a Mick Gordon produced soundtrack with the special edition, and Mick Gordon wasn't even in the loop for that. Again, this is all according to Mick Gordon's claims. And then he is also saying that a huge number of audio tracks that he made and submitted to the audio team that were denied were actually used in the game, and essentially claiming that he wasn't compensated for that music. He was compensated for 12 tracks. I think he says they used 22. So Gordon says that he sought legal counsel on the matter because of this. He claims that this damaged his reputation. And because of this, Mark Stratton offered him a, quote, six-figure sum to essentially not talk negatively about ZeniMax games. This was a contract that basically said, you cannot say negative things about ZeniMax games. Please don't. Which meant he could not dispute that open letter on the Reddit post. His main thing was, I want that Reddit post taken down. I don't think that's fair. I want this taken down. It represents me in a poor light, and I don't think that's fair. So clearly, initially, he didn't instantly go on Twitter and say, well, this is BS. He has been working behind the scenes with legal counsel to get this resolved. So, following some backlash, following this statement, or following these claims from Mick Gordon, Bethesda has dropped an official statement on this post. So I'm going to read it here because it's interesting, and it's just amplifying this drama tenfold. So here is the statement from Bethesda. The recent post by Mick Gordon both mischaracterized and misrepresented the team at id Software, the development of Doom Eternal, Marty Stratton, and Chad Mossholder with a one-sided and unjust account of an irreparable professional relationship. We are aware of all the details and history in this matter and unequivocally support Marty, Chad, and the team at id Software. We reject the distortion of the truth and selective presentation of incomplete, quote, facts We stand ready with full and complete documented evidence to disclose in an appropriate venue as needed. The statements posted online have incited harassment and threats of violence against Marty, Chad, and the id Software team. Any threats or harassment directed towards members of our teams will be met with swift and appropriate action to protect their health and safety. We remain incredibly proud of id's previous collaborations with Mick Gordon and ask that fans refrain from reaching conclusions based on his account and, more importantly, from attacking any of the individuals mentioned on either side. And just one more nugget of drama. So after Bethesda posts this publicly, Mick Gordon redropped his tweet that said, "I was offered 6 figures to stay quiet. I think the truth is more important." So Bethesda's doubling down. Mick Gordon's doubling down. MVG, what is your read on this very, very public spat?
Man, this is tough. I mean, I do feel for Mick on this one. I mean, I think in general the industry needs to get better when it comes to crediting and compensating contractors, consultants who do work with AAA studios. And I think the situation is just kind of sad. And there's really no winners here. And like, while I do hope that this does get resolved amicably, I mean, I feel like Bethesda's firing a shot back that's basically saying, "We'll see you in court, buddy, and we're going to prove everything that you've said is false." And look, knowing Bethesda, they probably have about 40 lawyers on retainer right now that that have vetted that statement and they've cross-checked it and gone through it so many times. So I think they're definitely in CYA mode. But look, I do feel for Mick on this one. I do think that he was wronged. Whether all the information that he has presented is accurate, I can't say, but I do believe that he has been wronged on this one. But having said that, I will tell you a story, Miles. So I worked with Bethesda and id on the Quake remaster in 2021. We worked with id and Bethesda for 2 years on that project. And I will say my experience with id Software, I don't know Marty Stratton. I did chat with him on a Zoom call when we shipped the game, but I don't know him at the same kind of on the same level as Mick Gordon did with the emails that were going back and forth. There was certainly like 5 managers probably as a buffer between me and Marty, but ultimately I really like working with those guys. They were nothing but professional, both Bethesda and id Software, during a very hectic period, I might add. We were consulting for id Software, so essentially we're doing pretty much the same thing as what Marty's doing in that sense. And my experience was fantastic. They were nothing but professional and great to work for. And we had to ship a game on 5 separate platforms on QuakeCon 2021. So there was pressure there. There were deadlines there. There was some stress there. But ultimately, I have nothing but good things to say. But with that said, look, I do think that Marty deserves some compensation for this. And I just don't know how this is going to play out. Like, if I was to speculate, Miles, I think that this is probably going to get settled out of court, and we'll never hear about what those terms were ever again. I think that's probably going to be the best result we can hope for. As far as Mick damaging his reputation, I understand how he probably feels about it, but I think Mick's respected and amazing and talented enough that I think he could probably walk in any studio and pitch a soundtrack and still get the job. I don't think this has really hurt him and his brand in any way. But having said that, the man obviously is very much hurting on this one, and I do feel for him, and I do hope that there is some resolution here. Obviously.
Yeah, and like you said, I don't think we'll ever get the satisfying answers that we want in a lot of these situations. We obviously just came off the back of the Helena Taylor Bayonetta 3 controversy. And that was another very public spat where she came out and basically accused Platinum Games of offering her terrible compensation. And then they came back and said, all right, well, here's actually what happened. And we had Jason Schreier talk to developers or talk to people within Platinum Games who would have information that said, no, that's not the account here. That's not actually how this played out. And so obviously, people are human. I'm not going to say that Mick Gordon is lying. I don't believe that he would come out on this public forum and double down.
No.
I mean, even though people are like, well, Helena did. She distorted the truth. And
right.
we're all going to distort the truth in a certain sense because our realities are all different. Our realities, how we interpret situations, how we interpret these deals, that's based on how we feel about the matter. And I don't think Mick Gordon is lying about how he feels on this. And, not to really, say that he was everything, but when you think of Doom 2016, I would say the first thing that people mention is the soundtrack.
Oh,
Doom 2016, that soundtrack hit. There are modern acts in hardcore and metal that rip off Mick Gordon's sound and style from the Doom 2016 soundtrack. That soundtrack was phenomenal, incredible. So he established that. People wanted more of that with Doom Eternal. And again, you're in a situation where he wants to deliver on that. He's getting pushed into these deadlines he's not happy with. There's all this stuff that comes to a head, and then somebody comes out and says, it's your fault. You did this. And I'm sure when you're working hard and at a certain point you want to be compensated for your work. And what your value is, probably subjective in a lot of ways. But ultimately, when we see more and more of these public spats, when we see more and more of these key figures come out and say, I'm not happy with what I'm paid, that I think that points to some underlying issues with how we're compensating creators, developers in the space, and what their worth is. Because some people want it to be a simple, all right, I'm going to give you this X amount, X dollars per track, and then peace, good luck, be on your way. And some people are saying, well, hey, like look at 2016. Like my music was a fundamental part of that experience. And I don't think it's fair that you're going to try to downplay that or take that away from me. So I don't know. I'm a little exhausted with how public these kind of spats have become. And again, like, I don't know what we're supposed to do with Bethesda's statement here. I don't know what when they posted that online, what were they expecting us to do with that?
See you in court. I think that's what they're saying.
That's what it reads like, just a bunch of threats.
Yeah, come for us. We got our receipts. We're ready to go. We got our 45 lawyers. We'll take you on. I think that's what it comes down to. But look, Miles, at the end of the day, I think for me, like you said you felt exhausted, and I do as well, because these stories, they always come up. But I will always advocate for contractors, consultants, people that work with a company, not at a company, to be appropriately credited and compensated for the work they do. Just because Mick Gordon, I don't know the exact number, but let's say if he did 20 songs for Doom Eternal and only 2 of them were used, he should still be paid for the 20 songs that he worked on, because he's doing the job that you asked him to do. Whether you decided that you selected only 2 of his works in the final game, that's on you. That's on the publisher. That's on, that's a different conversation. But the actual work that he produced, whether it was on the game that shipped or not, should be irrelevant. He should still be compensated. And that's one thing that I've seen, and this came up with Metroid Dread like over a year ago, where there was some studios that worked that were not credited with that game. There was some developers, there was some QA people that had worked on Metroid Dread but had left what's the studio, Mercury Steam, thank you, that worked at Mercury Steam in the QA department and didn't get credited for it. Or they worked as a developer on Metroid Dread but only worked for, let's say, 6 months, right? And apparently that's some type of cutoff to say that that's not enough time for you to hit the credits. My thing is, anyone, whether you are currently at a company or you worked on a game and you left the company, you're a consultant, you're a contractor, it doesn't matter. If you had any hand in that particular game's development, then you should be appropriately credited. And that's one area that I really want the industry to get better at. And look, I think Bethesda should have credited Marty appropriately, and he should be compensated for all the work that he did for Doom Eternal, whether that is something that was on the disc when it came out or not. It doesn't matter. He should be credited and compensated.
I totally agree. I think that 6 months, a lot of this comes down to technicalities. When you look at contractor and publisher developer relationships, there's a lot of things in contracts that say we own this. You don't own this. You are producing something for us that we own. You're relinquishing all of these rights and these exceptions. And so then, like you said, with the Mercury Steam situation and Metroid Dread, people who worked on the game for months and months don't get credit for it. And we saw people coming out online and saying, hey, I worked on Metroid Dread, but you wouldn't know because my name's not in the credits because I didn't work there for 6 months. And I think, that is a huge glaring example of how these dynamics, how these big companies, because let's be real, Bethesda's huge. like you said, they have a huge number of lawyers standing by, ready to use these technicalities to try to make Mick Gordon look awful. And if they can make Mick Gordon look awful in a court of law, then they win. Sorry,
Yeah.
you don't get anything. And that's, as much as the law, we hope that it abides by the truth and the reality of the situation. There's a lot of technicalities that can, I don't know, skew how that's presented to the public, people not in the know with the situation. So, yeah, the games industry relies so heavily on contract work, and there's definitely some conversations worth being had about how do we alter that in a way that benefits everyone, because it's one-sided a little bit.
I agree. And look, I hope Mick finds what he's looking for. Yeah, I hope he gets the result he needs, he wants. I mean, he's awesome, and I want to see more of his work in video games. I would hate for him to step away from video games after this. I wouldn't blame him if he did, because he obviously is very hurt about this. And again, I definitely understand, but I want to hopefully feel like he's gonna move on from this, and hopefully we'll hear his chops in other games going forward, because I'm a big fan.
A huge fan. Dude
Yeah.
rips. Like his performance, what was it at the Game Awards?
Oh yeah,
that,
man.
That was one of the
legendary.
best. Oh,
Legendary.
so good. The dude kills it, and he writes great music, puts out great work, and yeah, it's. I'm sure he feels really disappointed and frustrated by the way that this is all played out. Because, like I said, this wasn't that post came out, and it sounds like at first he reached out behind the scenes to be like, hey, what's going on here? And he just wanted a lot of it was he just wanted that Reddit post down because he felt that the Reddit post damaged his reputation. And now it's escalated into this whole he said, she said, all right, see you in court type situation on a public forum, and all of us have to stand on the sidelines and watch mommy and daddy fight about this. And it's unfortunate.
Blue Moon FC in the chat saying he should get together with Double Fine for a new Brutal Legend. Ship it. I'm all about that.
Ship it.
I'm all about that.
Yeah, Tim, I know, Tim, you're busy. You're probably working on some other stuff, but I know you have a soft spot for Brutal Legend. I know Jack Black, the GOAT, one of the just sweetest, nicest dudes ever, would be down to do Brutal Legend 2 in a heartbeat. All right, so
oh yeah,
let's go. Let's make it happen. All right, want to give a quick shout out to everyone joining us live on youtube.com/Miles Dompier. If you were digging the show, hit that like button, share it out, subscribe to the channel, all of that good stuff. And now we got to talk a little bit about Call of Duty exclusivity, boy.
Oh, a favorite topic. Love this.
Oh, bring it in. Yeah, let's go. All right, another week means another conversation about Call of Duty exclusivity. All right, so obviously there's been a very public string of developments regarding Microsoft's proposed acquisition of Activision Blizzard King, ABK. People get annoyed when I say Activision Blizzard King, but I like to. It's so much. It's such a mouthful. So Phil Spencer appeared on The Verge's podcast, the Decoder podcast, to discuss the future of the company, the deal, how they want to grow into the mobile space. So there's a lot of interesting nuggets about what the future of Microsoft looks like. I would recommend checking out the full interview if you haven't. There's a lot of great context. I love listening to Phil Spencer speak. He's very deliberate with his words, which I appreciate because he has to be in those situations. And I love when he's on podcasts because, normally when he posts something online, he's got a team that he has to consult. He has to be like on edge, ready, like, all right. But on a podcast, it's a different space. So he has to think for a second, how can I phrase this without getting myself in trouble, without getting Xbox in trouble? So very deliberate and very important how these things are phrased. So as a part of this conversation, Phil Spencer, once and for all, again, confirmed what exclusivity would look like for Call of Duty. And I love this interview because the host was probing questions like, all right, so is this going to be only via Xbox Game Pass? Is this only going to be via the cloud? Like, how are you going to do this? And Phil Spencer just blatantly said, no, there's no catch. We're not going to trick you. You're going to be able to play Call of Duty natively on PlayStation. As you know it now, there's not going to be exclusive stuff on Xbox. We're not going to make you jump through some hoops. You can just play Call of Duty. And so it was funny to have him you could tell he was just frustrated with the question and the amount of times he's asked the questions and how the community speculates on what that means. So essentially, Phil Spencer is saying, as long as Call of Duty exists as we know it, Call of Duty will be on PlayStation if this deal closes. So Do you think Xbox genuinely intends to keep Call of Duty on PlayStation in perpetuity?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I mean, I don't think Phil would reiterate and double down and triple down and quadruple down on the same message over and over again, unless that was to be the case. Look, it's very easy to say that what's going to happen in 10 years after this, what's going to happen to Call of Duty on, let's say, PlayStation. The answer is we don't really know. I mean, we think that it's going to continue, but look, I don't know how many times Phil has to say the same thing over and over again for people to get it. And I think there's definitely some suspicion there, that his words are, like you said, carefully crafted
Mhm.
to make sure that he doesn't get in any trouble. But look, I do think he believes this, and I think the reason why Microsoft is more than happy to continue Call of Duty on PlayStation in perpetuity is because while it is a big deal, it's a very big deal. It's not the only thing that is important to Microsoft here. I think there's other factors of this acquisition that they're very much interested in. There's obviously the Blizzard side. There's the Warcraft, the World of Warcraft, the Diablo 4 stuff. There's all that stuff, right? There's also the King side, the mobile side, where there is so much untapped potential there for Microsoft to basically assume control of a very, very profitable mobile side that is not really sexy in terms of media coverage because it's mobile stuff, but I guarantee you there is a lot of money to be made on the mobile side. And so it's look, I think if Microsoft does concede Call of Duty and they do agree that it will be on PlayStation in perpetuity, as long as they call the shots. I mean, I still think it's going to be day one on Game Pass, but it'll still be on the PlayStation 5 on the same day. I don't think it's. I mean, it's important, yes, but it's not the most important thing for this acquisition. And I think there will be some concessions made for this deal to go through, and I think this is definitely one of them.
Yeah, it's really interesting to talk about the amount of times and the number of different ways that Phil Spencer's required to explain what this deal
Yeah,
means for Xbox, what it's going to mean for Call of Duty. And the reality is there's a small fraction of people who are really fixating on that. He alludes to in this interview that he doesn't outright say it's PlayStation, but he says something to the effect of, well, Nintendo's not interested, or Nintendo, we're going to bring Nintendo to, or we're going to bring Call of Duty to Nintendo platforms. So he kind of alludes to the fact that the Call of Duty thing is not really a big factor of what this is about. Like you said, this is more about the mobile side of things, growing into that mobile space, what that means for the cadence of their subscription services like Xbox Game Pass. And it's not really about taking games away, quote unquote. It's about, leveraging games to make their platform more enticing. And that's really what a business is all about. And I don't see a more legitimate, healthy way to compete than to do it that way, where
yeah,
you're not locking things behind a wall, you're not taking things away from anyone else. You were just saying, all right, here's an option, and this option just happens to be, when it comes to the value proposition, pretty hard to beat. I think that's where you want to be as a business, and I think that's kind of the fruit that they're looking at for this acquisition. And that's why they're looking to spend $69 billion on it.
yeah.
Um, One final question on Call of Duty. If you had free reign with this deal, there was no regulation, restrictions, nothing, how would you handle Call of Duty exclusivity? Would you keep it multi-plat, or would you squirrel it away?
I'd take it. I'd take it exclusive. Honestly,
Oh,
yeah, I would take it exclusive.
okay. What's your
Yeah.
reasoning for that? Let's hear it.
Well, I
You're
think
taking games from the gamers, MBG.
yeah,
You're a
and look,
villain.
I have both. I will say I have everything. So I have the Switch, the PS5, and the Xbox. But look, I would probably take it exclusive and make it make it available on Game Pass day one. And the reason why is simply because I think that Sony, they have their fair share of exclusivity on their games. Obviously, Final Fantasy is one, Seven Remake, and other games like that they've taken exclusivity deals around. So I think it's just business, man. If you've got the option to take it, then I would take it, and that's that. Like I think at the end of the day, it's not really something that I feel like Sony would be too happy with if that was the case. But I also feel like they do very similar things,
Yes, yes,
with
they
their
do.
games, and I think this is just one that if it was available to Microsoft, that they would have probably taken it. But obviously, I don't think that's going to happen at this time.
Yes, PlayStation arguably has built a reputation and a strong platform around the idea of, locking third-party content away. We
Yeah.
know they have a track record of it. They're not shy for doing it, and a lot of people, I think, fairly call PlayStation's concerns about this deal out in that regards. Like, well, it's not fair when you do it. It's how we built the PlayStation 4 to what it was, but we don't want anyone else doing it. But that being said, I agree. A lot of people agree with you in the sense that you could take this exclusive, you could use it to leverage your platform in a very aggressive way. When you
Hmm.
lock down Call of Duty, which it just did $1 billion in a couple days. It's a juggernaut that won't quit. We had people saying, "Oh, Vanguard flopped the series, it's dead. No one cares about Call of Duty." And then the next year they come in and put the biggest selling Call of Duty ever out. So clearly, there's still some weight there. And clearly, if you're Xbox, you could leverage that. You can make that exclusive and you say, bam, you want to play Call of Duty? You have to play it right here. Sorry.
Yeah.
Dems to breaks, gamers.
Yeah. But I don't think it's that much worse for Microsoft that they do give it to Sony. But again, if they offer it on Game Pass day one and they still have the PlayStation version available on day one, which they will, I mean, I think that's good enough for Microsoft to say, look, Game Pass is the best value in gaming. We got Call of Duty on day one. Jump on it right now. You can play it immediately. And if they have, I think that's the most important thing for them. It doesn't necessarily matter if it's running on PlayStation 5 hardware. For them, I think they still win as a result of this. Even though I personally, again, I would keep it exclusive. If there was a way to do it, I would do it.
Call me Mr. Kumbaya if you want. But if it was my call, I would keep it multi-platform
Okay.
simply for what it means for the raw amounts of money that you get. Because
Hmm.
we know that Call of Duty would still sell incredibly well as an exclusive. But I think it's safe to say that maybe potentially it wouldn't hit the same numbers having, a smaller pool. There wouldn't be a 100% conversion rate of people buying an Xbox and playing Call of Duty. I think that's safe to assume. But if you use Call of Duty like you use Minecraft as this business vessel, which then you can use those resources, that infinite stream of cash to invest in other projects, I think that is going to open up more possibilities for new IP. I think that's going to open up new possibilities for sequels to franchises that normally wouldn't exist, that people have been
Yep.
wanting. And I think it's
Yep.
going to allow you to be in a position where you have the ultimate revenue stream, and you can use that revenue stream to supplement your business, to supplement Xbox Game Pass in a way that just doesn't exist currently, because there aren't many franchises that carry the same weight and selling power of Call of Duty. So for me, if I'm running the show at Xbox, I'm looking at Call of Duty, I'm saying this is a money horse. I'm going to use that money to invest elsewhere, and we're just going to keep Call of Duty as it is outside of annual releases. I really hope annual releases for Call of Duty are dead post this acquisition. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's the best for that team, and that would allow some of these other developers to spread their wings and actually make games that aren't Call of Duty.
Mhm. I mean, I guess the last thing I'll say about why I'd like it to be exclusive to Xbox is you kind of touched on it, but it also kind of breeds competition. Sony right now, there's no SOCOM game, there's no Killzone, there's no Resistance. I mean, it would be awesome if they could revisit those franchises and offer up some of those amazing games. I mean, I love SOCOM. I used to play the hell out of SOCOM back in the day. I would love to see a new SOCOM game, and I feel like because Call of Duty does exist, it seems like it's not something that is as important to the PlayStation brand potentially, and that could just be a throwaway guess. I don't know, but I don't know. Like, I think, if you make a disruptive change like that, it forces other companies to compete. And I ultimately would like to see that happen. But,
Yeah,
I'm not,
that's
I'm
why
not
Game Pass exists. Game Pass
absolutely
exists because Xbox was getting stomped. If we're
right.
being real, they were not doing very hot, and they had to do something innovative, groundbreaking, and radical to be like, all right, how do we get people interested in Xbox right now?
Yeah, agree. And look, I'm not unhappy. Whichever way this goes, I think I think the deal will get signed. Obviously, there's resistance from like the CMA and there's other groups that
Hmm.
right now, but I think this is really just more due diligence type stuff. I don't think it's much to do about anything. I think the deal will go through, but yeah, Call of Duty will remain multi-platform in perpetuity, as far as I can, can assume in this one.
Yeah, I'm of the mindset that either way, I do assume it'll be multi-platform for the foreseeable future. Either way, I'm going to be playing it on Xbox Game Pass. It doesn't change how I would consume it, unless there are aggressive concessions for whatever reason that say, "All right, you can't put Call of Duty in Game Pass." And then I wonder if Microsoft would even do it. Would they go through with that deal if that was the level of concessions that they had to make?
That's a real good question.
Because I imagine that's
Yeah,
that's the selling point, and if you take
yeah.
that away, do you even bother?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, maybe. And again, it all depends on everything else that they would get as part of this deal. Like I said, the mobile side is obviously something that is not really talked about as much, but I think there's a lot of money to be made there as well. It really just depends on everything other than Call of Duty, what that looks like as far as the bottom line on the books, as far as how much revenue that they would generate year on year type of thing. But um, I think if I was to guess, if Call of Duty was off the table for Game Pass, that would be something that Microsoft would be like, "Ooh, I don't know. Maybe we need to, rethink this one a little more and potentially, I'm not saying walk away from the deal, but it would be a pretty big deal if they couldn't get Call of Duty on Game Pass."
Yeah, so I'll play devil's advocate with this situation. Phil Spencer's saying Call of Duty isn't, that's not the thing you should be focusing on.
Mhm.
That's not what we're focusing on. But if it comes to a head and they say that no, if we can't have Call of Duty and Game Pass, then we don't want this deal, then it kind of suggests that maybe Call of Duty was a big piece of this pie here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think Phil's just being I'm not saying he's playing down Call of Duty's importance because that would be, silly to do that, but I think he's very smart the way he talks, and that
Yes,
is,
I agree
look,
with that.
there is a lot of meat on the bone on this deal, and you're focusing on one piece of it, right? Like there is a lot more here that is not talked about as much. It's all about Call of Duty. It's all about Call of Duty, but there is so much more here that we are so much more interested in. But to your point, Miles, I think yeah, if Call of Duty was off the table for Game Pass, ooh, they may take another look at the deal and say, was it really worth the 60 million or whatever, or 60 billion, whatever we paid for it? Maybe not.
Yeah. Like Phil Spencer, he's looking at this bird. He's like, Call of Duty's a thigh. You're missing out on the succulent breasts that are
Right.
that are king and
Yeah.
all these other IP that we're sitting on.
I'm a leg man, so
Yeah.
there you go.
But yeah, I think when we talk about what's good for the consumer, obviously it's Game Pass is easy to advocate for the customer because it's a barrier to entry that's affordable for a lot of people and it gets them in the door. So really, I feel like if that was a concession, that would be to appease other competitors more than the consumers. And again, a lot of these agencies are designed to look out for what's best for the consumer
Mhm.
fundamentally. So I can't imagine that that would be the level of concessions, but who knows?
Yeah, I don't think so. Like I said, I think it's going to be it's going to be exactly the same as it is in today's world, other than the fact that you'll be able to play it on Game Pass.
All right, we got a super chat, quote, super chat. Again, if things are a little different, while I work to get the channel monetized, all of that good stuff, I've set up a Streamlabs little tip jar here where you can ask your questions, drop your comments. So we got one from Bonkster here who says, the real question is, when are we getting another Super Bonk and when are you doing an episode on it? MVG, are you a Super Bonk fan?
I am. I love Super Bong. It's awesome.
Okay, all right.
When am I doing an episode? Is he talking to me or is he talking to you? Are you a
I,
Bonk fan?
I'm I'm infamously not a huge Bonk fan, but
Okay.
I feel like 90% of the chat has no idea what Super Bonk is.
Super Bonk is a 2D side scroller that came out, I think, back in the SNES years and years ago. I think it also came out for the TurboGrafx 16. It's an awesome game. Bonk's Adventure and all that sort of stuff. Am I going to do an episode on it? I don't really know. That's more of a DF retro, I will say, that like my good friend John Lenneman would probably do at some point.
Yeah,
But
John, get on
yeah,
Super Bonk. Let's go.
but I may take a look at it. I may take a look at it.
There we go. Love that. All right. Again, huge shout out to everyone joining us live. If you missed the intro to the show and you're watching live, things are a little different. We're hosting on youtube.com/Miles Dompier versus youtube.com/Windows Central Gaming. And I appreciate everyone coming along for the ride. Another part of the podcast, the Decoder podcast with On Verge, talked about the Keystone and why the Keystone was ultimately shelved. Jez from Windows Central has reported on it. It's something we've talked about on the show before, but Xbox was looking to make a streaming-only Xbox companion device that was very affordable, and you could access Xbox Cloud Gaming on it, connected to anything with an HDMI TV, and immerse yourself in the Xbox ecosystem. So, according to Phil, he is saying that the reason that it's shelved temporarily is because they couldn't hit the price point. It was coming higher than they wanted it to be, and it sounds like they were targeting about $100 was the goal here. And what they had, the iteration that was infamously on Phil's shelf, wasn't that. They weren't able to hit that target price point. With Xbox coming to more TVs, browsers, any device we already have, does the idea of a streaming-only box interest you all that much?
Personally, for me, it doesn't, because I'm someone that likes just physical media and just downloading digital games and playing them kind of natively on target hardware. But look, you can't turn a blind eye to this stuff. The cloud, is here. XCloud is a good service that's still being refined right now. Microsoft is obviously investing a lot of money and time into this. They have millions and millions of Azure farms around the world right now that can host this stuff. The infrastructure is on point, as we know. So it makes a lot of sense for them to continue to make strides in the world of the cloud. Look, this Keystone device is interesting because I think there is a market for something like this. But Phil Spencer is absolutely on point that I think something like this, I would almost even argue that $99 is too expensive for something like this. I would almost see if you could get it lower than that. And ultimately, I think he made the right call in that it's still not quite time yet to unveil something like this, especially when, if you're gonna, let's say, they got it down to $125 and they sold that, that would be a hard sell, especially when you can basically get a Series S for $250 these days. So I think, a system like this is interesting. There's definitely a market for it. They made the right choice in kind of holding it back. They haven't really held it back because nothing was actually announced officially. But I do think that Phil's right in that this needs to come down in price a little more before it can be competitive as a cloud device. We saw what happened with Stadia. Was a disaster for them. There are other services. Amazon Luna is one. Obviously, Nvidia has their own service as well. XCloud is Microsoft's thing. But yeah, look, I think they made the right choice waiting. And if this thing did come out, I'd probably buy one and check it out. I think it
Yeah.
would be kind of cool to see what it's doing because it's specifically targeting cloud gaming. So there's definitely some hardware in there that's kind of really pushing the packets that kind of come into the system and get pushed out. So there's obviously some really optimized types of networking type functionality in there. But ultimately, I think they made the right choice. It's a passing curiosity for me right now, but hopefully we'll hear about it, over the next couple of years, and it will actually come out to market because I'd like to see it in action. I think it'd be really cool.
Yeah, because when we look at price points right now, if this was above $100, we have the
Yeah.
Series S right now, $250. I think Target's even giving you a $50 gift card, I think, in the
Yep.
US if you buy it. So it's essentially $200 right now for somebody to go get a Series S, that is a amazing deal in of itself. And you get all of those cloud gaming capabilities built in there. And so it would be a harder sell, I think, to be like, okay, you can spend $150 on this, for example, and you
Yeah.
can get the controller, you can stream games, or you can pay $100 more theoretically and get a Series S and have everything else that you could do on this platform. So For me, when this device launches, it needs to be the perfect price point and it needs to have a stellar experience because
Yeah, it has to just work, doesn't it? You can't be fiddling around with network connectivity tests and you know, setting up your router and opening ports and just stuff like that. You have to just be able to turn the thing on, sign into your Xbox Live account, and go. And that's it. And I think, I mean, they probably understand. The user experience has to be on point, like you said, Miles, and that's something they're actively probably working on right now to ensure that that is the case.
because they're really only going to get one chance with the average customer. Right now,
Yeah,
Xbox Cloud Gaming is a great option on your PC or your phone. You can go in and you can supplement what you already own. But if you're going to release a device that is only designed to do one thing, and somebody goes into a store, they go into their Target, they buy it and they take it home, and the experience isn't great, I
yeah,
don't think moving forward they're gonna be that interested in Xbox Cloud Gaming. If they bought
yeah.
the dedicated streaming device and the experience wasn't that great, that's it's gonna have the inverse effect because I think ultimately this is designed to get more adoption. They want a hyper low cost barrier to entry to the Xbox ecosystem that works well and shows you all the great games, blah blah blah, gets you subbed to Xbox Game Pass, all of that great stuff. And if the
Yeah,
experience isn't great, it's not gonna really increase their market share in a notable way.
agree. And they have to be very, very transparent about what this system is doing and who it's marketed for and who it's targeting. Because it's easier to say, hey, you can enjoy Xbox games from anywhere with this one little device. You can take it with you and play anywhere you want. But the reality is that is not true at all. If you're on crappy McDonald's Wi-Fi or hotel Wi-Fi, it's not going to work. It's going to
No.
it's going to be a horrible experience. So it would really be great for them to suggest that, look, this is going to work really well for you if you have this minimum level of bandwidth, upload and download speed. Because if you just market it as play your Xbox games anywhere with this one cool device, there are a lot of people are going to have, like you said, Miles, a really bad first experience, and that's enough for people to be like, "This is a piece of plastic. I'm going to return this because it doesn't work." So I think they're aware of those things, and I think that's one of the reasons why Phil has kind of mentioned that it's still very much in the R&D phase right now. They're still trying to figure out how it's going to work, but I think they know all that stuff, and ultimately, I'd like to see it come out. I think it would be a really cool piece of tech when it does.
Exactly. It would be a great supplement for people who don't wanna buy a new TV. I see some people mentioning that in the chat, and that yeah,
Hmm.
that I think is who this is targeted for. People who maybe have an Xbox or maybe wanna try out Xbox and don't wanna buy a Samsung 2021 or newer television to be able to experience it. It will, I imagine, roll out to more and more TVs, more devices, more models, but I think at a certain point, there's gonna be a hard cutoff where if you don't have a TV that's this age, you can't experience it, but you can buy this device, you can plug it into an HDMI port, and bam, you're good to
Yeah,
go. I do agree that they need to be very transparent with you need this speed. You need this speed if you want this experience. And if you don't have this speed, it's not
yeah,
going to be fun.
right.
Not going to be fun for you. And I hope that
Mhm.
they're honest about that. We saw that with Google Stadia, but Google Stadia really undersold the bandwidth. The graph that they put out that said you could do 4K and you could do 1080 at this bandwidth, that was really skewed. Technically, sure, you could get that, but they
Well, they
needed to
weren't even.
add a lot to that.
Well, the Stadia was interesting because they weren't. They were throwing around all these kind of buzzwords, talking about reducing latency and negative lag and all this sort of stuff that was going around. Look, gamers and customers aren't dummies, especially when it comes to cloud. People have internet at home. They know exactly the capabilities of their ISP, what it can do, what it can't do. They know their uploads and download speeds. Trying to tell people, you know, ours is the best because latency is reduced. Stuff like that is just marketing fluff. I want to see something like this come out. I think the cloud is a cool side product, or it complements the main hardware. But like you said, Nate, Miles, just be transparent and just let people know exactly what this is and what it's not. And I think that will go a long way to making customers feel a lot happier about a service like this. And I think that's one of the reasons why Stadia ultimately, I mean, Stadia had a lot of issues, but it's one of the reasons why I feel like Stadia did not survive. The tech was fantastic. I think the Stadia tech, the streaming tech, is actually out of all the ones I've tried, including xCloud, is probably the best one that's around. But as we saw, it didn't survive. But hopefully, Keystone will be a good gap in the market for Microsoft. I think it will be, and yeah, hopefully we'll see it come out in a couple of years.
Yeah, you bring up an excellent point. Having that trust with your customer is very important, and I think that's the main difference when we look at the success of Xbox Cloud Gaming versus Stadia. Xbox
Hmm.
Cloud Gaming, I commend the team because they came out and said, "You can experience this, but this is a beta." And I
Yep.
believe, correct me if I'm wrong, they let you try some stuff for free really early on to say, all right, this is definitely a beta. You can try it out. Here's, we got some kinks to work out, as opposed to Stadia, which had the big launch. It had the hard big launch, and they sold you on this idea. They had a date and they shipped it. And when they
Yep.
shipped it on its big official launch, it was not that tight. A lot of people had issues. And that's why a lot of people, I think, were like, oh, this doesn't work well. And then from that point on, they just associated Stadia with not working that well. And like you said,
Yeah.
the tech of Stadia was fantastic. When things worked well, you had a great connection. It was a great experience. But they had that big rollout, and that big rollout had a bunch of negative PR. And the
Hmm.
average person only saw the negative headlines and negative reports about what this tech is and just moved on and said, all right, I don't care about this.
Yeah. Trying to tell gamers that you're going to disrupt the industry with cloud technology is not a good idea. Like we all know what the cloud can do and what it can't do. It's a great value add to the current landscape of video games, and I don't
Yes.
think it's ever going to replace, you know, the way that we play video games going forward in the foreseeable future.
No, it is, like you said, a great complementary option right now, but for the average person, it is not. It cannot be a replacement, and I think
Hmm.
that is where people like Stadia misread the possibilities. Sure, if you live in San Francisco, you can probably have a great Stadia experience. If you live anywhere in the middle of the United States, Stadia
Yeah.
is not an option for you.
Hmm.
So it's important. You touched on this a little bit, but another section of this interview spoke about King, about the mobile side of things, and how, really, like you said, that is where things get interesting for Phil Spencer and company about the future. Phil Spencer touched on what it means, what it opens up, and how the company wants to be nimble. So let me read a quick quote from this interview about the Activision deal and what the mobile component of this deal means. From Phil Spencer. In terms of the Activision opportunity, I keep saying this over and over, and it's true. It definitely starts with the view that people want to play games on every device that they have. In a funny way, the smallest screen that we play on is actually the biggest screen when you think about the install base in a phone. That's just a place where if we don't gain relevancy as a gaming brand, over time the business will become untenable. So Phil Spencer here is suggesting that they don't really have the option to ignore the mobile side of gaming. He talks about the growth. There's the infamous comment about Microsoft trying to reach the billions of gamers around the world. So what do you think is Xbox's biggest opportunity in the mobile space in regards to King, the King component of this?
Well, I think it's Call of Duty Mobile, right? I mean,
Ooh,
isn't that the low hanging fruit here? They King develops and owns Call of Duty Mobile that makes a lot of money. And honestly, I think this is something that Sony really isn't that interested in at this time. Like, I think it's all about for Sony, it's all about Call of Duty on consoles, right? So I think that's their biggest opportunity. And again, King is makes a lot of money for Activision. So I think this is Microsoft's kind of plan to really enter this space. So I think for me, it has to be Call of Duty as the big wild card for the big draw card for Microsoft when they take this when they make this acquisition actually happen.
because we know they've dabbled. They've done Gears Pop. They've had some
Hmm.
some Forza games as well on mobile. So they've dipped their toes in the water and they've tried to build up mobile. But I think when they look at King, that's already an established thing that people know, people play on. It makes money. So it's a lot easier to integrate that than it is to fundamentally build something new from the ground up. And again, Call of Duty. It's all coming back to Call of Duty in the end. That is a huge IP. Call of
Oh
Duty
yeah,
Mobile is a huge phenomenon that makes a lot of money. So that is a big component of it for sure.
I mean, and I think the other thing we have to be very mindful of is we have to. I mean, Microsoft knows that its big competition is going to be like the Google Play Store and the App Store and all that stuff, right? So they need to come up with some type of way, potentially where they can offer better revenue splits from from people that want to develop on Xbox mobile platform, for example. I know I'm kind of deviating a little bit away from the King acquisition, but if they are making strides to get into the mobile space, those are the kind of things that they have to be thinking about, and I'm sure they are. But look, at the end of the day, this acquisition, as we mentioned, it's not just about Call of Duty on console. There is a lot here. There's a lot of meat on the bone, as we mentioned, and mobile probably is one third of the of the meat that we're talking about here. So I think they are making a lot of inroads to ensure that they have a foothold in the mobile space when this acquisition goes through. I mean, they know about it, but they also have to compete with Apple and they have to compete with Google Play and all that. And that's a very, very interesting and very competitive market to get in. But I think they have the tools they need to actually get there with this King acquisition.
I think that positions them a lot better, and we've seen the filings for them basically trademarking, patenting a store, a mobile storefront.
Hmm.
So they're interested in it, and they're trying to position themselves to have a worthwhile offering, because we all know, rest in power to the Windows Phone. We all know what happened when they launched a service and an ecosystem that wasn't widely supported. And there was the drama. I think Google blocked YouTube on the
Hmm.
Windows Phone, so there were some
That's right.
competitors saying, "We don't even want you in this space. We're not going to give you the video app. If you don't have YouTube, I'm sorry. How are you supposed to exist in the space? Like, people aren't going to just go somewhere else. It's just so established." But that being said, yeah, Microsoft is going to step into the Thunderdome with the Google Play Store and iTunes, and that's ooh,
Yeah.
the Apple Store, and that's crazy. That is such a seemingly insurmountable challenge for them. So I'm interested to see how they approach it, post this deal. And then if this deal doesn't go through, what is their answer to that? Do
I
do they
mean,
have an answer?
well, that's the $1 million question. I mean, the only way we can kind of speculate on how this is going to go for Microsoft is take a look at the Bethesda acquisition. When that happened, and again, I know there's two separate entities, completely different scenarios, but when Microsoft acquired Bethesda, it was pretty much business as usual for Bethesda. Nothing has really changed other than the fact that Microsoft is the parent company. You still have Starfield, you still have Todd Howard, you still have Pete Hines running the show. All that stuff is still there, right? Nothing has really changed. I'd like to think that the first couple of years of this acquisition, when it goes through, I think Microsoft is probably mostly going to be observing and letting things go the way things have been going, and not really messing around too much with all the current ways that things are being developed, including the mobile space. But behind the scenes, like you said, they're ramping up the Xbox um, store on mobile. They're making more deals. They're signing up more mobile developers for mobile games. They're still bringing out Call of Duty mobile, Warzone, Candy Crush, Minecraft. I think is also on mobile as well. Those things are going to make money, and they're going to continue to bring money in. And I think they know that they need to. They can't just sit back and just collect all the revenue from those games. While it's very, I guess there is there is a desire to do that. Microsoft has always wanted to break into the mobile space, and this is the way to do it, man. Like, you acquire
Mm-hmm.
King, you get COD, you get Warzone, you get Candy Crush. Now it's time, you're on the launching pad. Now it's time to really just, take this rocket ship and go. So I think that's what they're gonna do.
Let's go. Now's your chance, Microsoft, to get into the arena and compete. And again, it'll be interesting to see once this deal closes. I think the European Commission announced that their deadline was extended to April. So now it'll be probably closer to April before we get resolution on this deal. Um, but I ultimately am going to be very excited when this is done, one way or the other.
I'm
Obviously,
I'm sick of talking about it, honestly. Like, every week there's a new thing, you know.
it's
Um,
I'm with you. Again, spoke about this earlier, it's exhausting, all right?
yeah,
I don't
it is.
need to see every single little detailed development vocal like that. But, it's the big question. It's the biggest deal in gaming history. And so obviously, as long as it's, up in the air, there's going to be questions about it. And people like Phil Spencer are going to have to go on shows and answer those questions. All right. What's happening, Phil? What's this mean for me and my PlayStation?
Very well said.
MVG, let's have fun. Chat, if you're here hanging out, having a good time, hit the like button, share it out. We're going to be talking about the Game Awards, because this week, Jeff Keighley and company officially announced the nominees for the 2022 Game Awards. So 31 categories in total. We are not covering all 31 categories. I'll tell you that right now. We'd be here for hours. But we are going to touch on a couple of key categories. So I would say arguably some of the biggest categories. And we're going to play a little game here. Because, as is tradition, after these nominees came out, everyone was fighting about who should win, who shouldn't be on this list, who should be on this list, how it's rigged, all of the typical fanfare that comes with the Game Awards. So we're going to have some fun, and we're going to go through these categories. And the twist is, I'm going to read off the official nominees as picked by the panel at the Game Awards. And we are going to have, you and I both are going to have one option from this list. We can A, add one game, B, remove one game, or B, swap one game on this list.
Okay.
Those are the rules, and that's the playground that we have to work with when it comes to these awards. So if you're in the chat, want to play along, let's dive straight into it, starting with the best score and music. So the nominees here are A Plague Tale Requiem, Elden Ring, God of War Ragnarok, Metal Hellsinger, and Xenoblade Chronicles 3. So MBG, how you feeling about that category? How you feeling about the representation on that list?
Well, I actually feel pretty good about that list. I will say, Miles, I haven't played all these games yet, so I do apologize. But
you haven't played every single game in 2022?
No, unfortunately. I have played Plague Tale
okay.
Requiem, which is a fantastic game. I've played and beaten Elden Ring, which is a fantastic game. God of War Ragnarok, I haven't played yet. I am planning on it. And the reason why I haven't played it is people are like, why haven't you played God of War? Well, simply because I have a week off at the end of the year. I always love to just sit down and play through all the video games that I haven't had a chance to play throughout the year. So it's basically getting caught up on the backlog at that point. So Ragnarok is definitely on the list. I love Metal Hellsinger, and Xenoblade Chronicles 3, while it's not my style of game, I've heard the music in that is phenomenal. Now, if I was to pick, I'm going to say Metal Hellsinger, because dude, that soundtrack is it is
that warms
amazing.
My heart, dude. Oh
Amazing.
my god, that soundtrack hits so hard. If you haven't played it, check it out for sure. If you're a metal fan, you have to. You absolutely have to. The tracks, we got Randy Blythe from Lamb of God. We got Serge Tankian from System of a Down. Matt Heafy from Trivium. Tatiana from Ginger. Like, the vocal lineup they have, it's just the best metal vocalists currently available. Just all said, yeah, we'll do some vocals. We'll do some vocals for this game. And it's, damn, it hits. So do you have any you want to add, swap, or remove?
No, not for this one. I'm pretty happy with this. Like, I'm trying to think if there's something else that I feel like could sneak in here, but no, I think this is a pretty good list overall, Miles. What do you got?
I was so happy with this list. If I'm being honest, again, don't get too mad. I haven't played God of War Ragnarok, and I haven't played Horizon Forbidden West this year. Okay, I'm sorry, I haven't played it. I haven't played those two. So as we go through those categories, I have to keep that in mind. I haven't played those two games. I apologize. Bear with me. But everything else on this list, I have played at least a little bit of. And like seeing Metal Hellsinger, that was the one where I was like, yes, all right, they are, making sure they have some representation there, because that game soundtrack is so good. Two Feathers, which I think is just a two composer team, did the entire soundtrack for that. And listening to interviews of them reaching out and just basically asking like their favorite metal music, hey, I'm making a game, do you want to do vocals? And to have people be like, yeah, sure, I'm in. And then just have that cascade to the point where, minor spoiler, but Serge Tankian is in it, of System of a Down, one of the most iconic bands, and he does the climax song to that game. It's like 7 minutes long, and oh my god, it is such an incredible song. It is so powerful, so much more fierce than anything System of a Down has done. And hearing Surge on that track,
oh yeah,
dude,
amazing.
So yes, stoked to see that. Overall, this list rocked. Elden Ring, the title track of Elden Ring, I think, is one of the best pieces of music I've ever heard in my life. Holy! Every time I boot the game up, I just sit on the menu and just wait for the boom, that explosion. And so stoked to see that there. Xenoblade Chronicles 3, amazing music. A lot of this is orchestral. Plague Tale Requiem, the strings when the rats come in. Awesome. Every time, just tight butthole pucker up when those strings come in, dude. Oh, so good. I will add one, and I promise for the people who know me, this is the only time I'll add it to this list. Evil Dead the game. Evil Dead the game, again, the title track alone to Evil Dead the game. If you haven't listened to it, Joseph LaDuca, who did the score for all of the Evil Deads, came back for it, and it hits. Oh, damn, it hits so hard.
I need to try it out. I haven't played it. I'll give it a listen.
Yeah, and then the overall music in general is just very on brand with the if you've seen Army of Darkness, it's kind of that chaotic, loud, aggressive, abrasive orchestral music every single moment. It's so good. I see people in the chat talking about Halo Infinite. Also, stellar original soundtrack. There's some confusion about Halo Infinite, this year, because I think technically it was available to be nominated for a lot of categories.
Technically, it could be nominated,
and it wasn't. So people, I think, shout out to the drummer on the Halo OST in particular, because my God, the drums on all of those tracks just go so hard.
Pretty good.
Best action game. Official nominees are Bayonetta 3, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, Neon White, Sifu, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge.
All right, Shredders is my pick. I love Shredder's Revenge. Man, that game is one of my favorite games I've played this year. Like top 3. It's exceptional. The 6-player drop in, drop out co-op is so much fun. I had six buddies, 5 buddies and myself play through the game when it came out. Man, it's so much fun, that game. So I'm gonna say Shredder's Revenge. It's probably not gonna win, but that is my pick. As far as if I would take something out and replace, yeah, I'd probably take out Sifu, and I think I would put in Kirby as the replacement for that. I see your notes here, Miles. I think you're saying the same thing as me, but yeah, I'd probably give Kirby a nod for this one. I think it deserves a spot.
Yeah, I would say even if we leave Sifu, I want to see Kirby in the Forgotten Land, because I'm a huge Kirby fan, but Kirby's been done dirty over the years. A lot of Kirby games aren't that great. Let's be real. Like, a lot of them are fine at best, and so for them to come out and actually put out a stellar Kirby game with an end game that this is going to sound like a meme and a joke, but the last few bosses feel pulled straight out of Elden Ring. Like, the last few bosses are just end of the world beings, as is tradition with Kirby games, and it's just I love that game so much. Power-ups were so great, gameplay was so tight, they refined the formula in a great way. Yes, Kirby in the Forgotten Land needs to be on this list. But I agree, Shredder's Revenge, as a Turtles in Time fan, as someone who played that game every single day for months and months, that was such a good time. Again, speaking of killer soundtrack, that was another stellar score.
Amazing.
The Shredders of the list here, of the official list, I don't know. I guess I'd probably go Neon White, because I was just so shocked by the moment-to-moment gameplay in that and how unique that game feels. So I was really excited to see that one on this list, because it is just a cool, compelling experience. It's a visual novel, and if I'm being honest, I just fast forward through all of the dialogue, because it's either nonsense or it's just bad. So that slows the pacing of things down a bit for me. But once you're in the game, once you have it in your hands, Neon White, fantastic.
I haven't played it. I will check it out. I've heard good things about it.
Well worth playing, for sure. Best RPG. We have Elden Ring, Live Alive. How do you say that? I say Live Alive. I say
Live Alive, but I don't really know which way you're supposed to say it.
Yeah, so I've never heard enough.
I've heard Live Alive, and Live Alive, and Live. I've even heard Live Alive, believe it or not.
Anyway, that one. that one. Pokemon Legends Arceus, Triangle Strategy, and Xenoblade Chronicles 3. How are you feeling about this list? This is an interesting one.
I feel pretty good about everything on this list. I am a big Live Alive fan. I played and finished it. I actually loved the original game on Super Famicom. I used to play it with like the translation patch. So for me, I think that is my favorite RPG. I don't think it's going to win. I would probably say that Xenoblade Chronicles 3 has it in the bag for the best RPG, but I'm going to say Live Alive. And I wouldn't swap anything. I think it's a good list.
Um, I appreciate having you on because Live Alive, Live Alive, that game is
Live
so
Alive.
good. It is so. I never played it originally. It's one of those games.
Mhm.
Like I have a lot of retro stuff. I've gone back and emulated stuff like Mother 3, Magical Vacation, a lot of these other cult RPGs from the forgotten era. But I've never played this one. And so when they announced the big remake of it, I was really excited because it's one of those games people just hold near and dear to their hearts. It's inspired stuff like Undertale, a lot of those teams because of its anthology storytelling. And
Mhm.
even it being what 25 years old, whatever it is, it was such the stories still held up a lot of the time. The narrative was great. The flow of gameplay was fantastic. So I love that. This list, to me, honest, this list in particular really aligns with my favorite games of the year: Elden Ring, Live Alive, and Pokemon Legends Arceus. I put those in my top five. Those three games are in my top five games of 2022. So I don't have much to say here. Triangle strategy I didn't really care for. So I'm going to swap triangle strategy with Mario and Rabbids.
Good
Sparks
pick.
of Hope.
Good pick.
Best art direction. We have Elden Ring, what a twist. God of War Ragnarok, Horizon Forbidden West, Scorn, and Stray are the official picks. What's the MVG pick?
I think that. Oh, I think this is a tough one because I could see Elden Ring getting it. I could see Ragnarok getting it. I could see Horizon getting it. I could also see Stray getting it and Scorn. I mean, I think they're all very, very good picks for best art direction. I think Elden Ring has got this one. I love the art style in the game. I think everything about that game is just beautifully crafted. I had an amazing experience playing through that game. I did 120 hours plus on that game, so I'm going to say Elden Ring's got it,
Elden
and no changes either. Good list again, very good list. I could definitely see why Scorn would get in there. I know Scorn was a polarizing game. A lot of people didn't like it. People did like it, but I think its art style is very very striking. I think a lot of people do like that. So I could see why that game would get into the conversation for this. But I think Elden Ring's got it.
Yeah, I reviewed Scorn for Windows Central. I gave it a like 7 out of 10, 3.5 out
Hmm.
of 5. Um, and most of that was because of the atmosphere, was the visuals. Some of the visuals in Scorn I will never ever forget. Towards the end of that game, it is just a cerebral, just mind f like you wouldn't believe. It just culminates in this climax that leaves you wondering what the hell you just experienced. So it is the gameplay's not great. The combat's not great. It's a little slow across the board, but the last 2-3 hours, oof, it makes it all worth it. The game's short; you can beat it in 6-ish hours, I would say. But the back quarter of it in particular is so good. So stoked to see that one on here. Elden Ring again. I made a joke tweet about Elden Ring winning basically every single category it's nominated for, but that's the kind of how I feel about the game. Elden Ring is just such a
Yeah.
phenomenally playing and looking game. Again, it's one of those games where people kind of panned the visual fidelity of the game at launch. A lot of critics, or skeptics, I should say. Critically, it's acclaimed, like no other game really has been. But a lot of critics online said, "Oh, well, it doesn't look that impressive graphically. It doesn't look like a current gen game, a next gen game." But
Hmm.
that art direction is unmatched. So many of those areas just are burned into my mind. I can tell you where everything is. I can tell you how things look. I can tell you how I felt the first time I went into these zones. And that is an achievement in a video game.
Yep.
Best game direction, we have Elden Ring, God of War Ragnarok, Horizon Forbidden West, Immortality, and Stray.
I think God of War Ragnarok has probably got this one in the bag, and I haven't played Immortality. I've played Stray. I didn't really care for Stray. I thought it was a cool concept. I like Some of the gameplay, some of the direction of that game overall, but wasn't really my type of game. Forbidden West is another game that I haven't played, so it's hard for me to talk about that. But look, I think God of War's probably got best game direction for me. I think it makes sense.
Yeah, I haven't played God of War myself, but just listening to people that I know and respect talk about it, seeing how excited and passionate they've been about that experience. Yeah, I feel like from a storytelling perspective, God of War and its direction and pacing seems to be pretty incredible. I saw someone compare it to a musical, and you have these flows of ups and downs, but the ups are the combat sections, and then it ebbs back down, and so yeah, that I could see that definitely winning that category. I would add one to this list that I don't see enough people talk about, and I don't think a lot of people played this game this year, and that's Nobody Saves the World. It's a little indie
Mhm.
game from the developers of Guacamelee, but it is such a great experience. The direction, it knows exactly what it wants to be. It knows exactly what it's doing. It's well intentioned with its art style. It's well intentioned with its gameplay mechanics, and it's well intentioned with the flow of every component of the game. So it dropped, I think, in January. So it's one of those games that came out in January that everyone moved on really fast and nobody really talked about. Not a lot of people played it initially at launch, but Nobody Saves the World. Was really hoping to see that get some love in the indie category, but was a little disappointed that that title wasn't nominated really for anything, because I think it is such a special experience. And if you're a fan of retro top-down games like Zelda, Link to the Past is kind of the first thing that comes to mind. It takes that idea and that fundamental and really plays with it in some great ways. So Nobody Saves the World needs more love. And shout out to Juicebox. What's that developer's name? Why am I blanking on it? I want to say Juicebox, but that doesn't sound right. Drinkbox.
It sounds good. Call them juice
Juicebox.
boxes.
That's gonna be my studio. Juicebox. All right. Controversial topic time. Best narrative. This has sparked a whole series of conversations online this week, but the nominees for Best Narrative are A Plague Tale Requiem, Elden Ring, God of War Ragnarok, Horizon Forbidden West, and Immortality.
I think God of War has got it.
Do you think Elden Ring has a narrative? Because that's been the conversation. Does Elden Ring even have a narrative?
It does. It does. But I mean, a lot of it is, you're the tainted one, and you have to, seek out the Elden Ring, right? I mean, that's pretty much
You're the
the narrative of the
tarnished.
game. The tarnished, not the tainted. What did I say tainted for? The tarnished one. And you have to seek out the Elden Ring, right? So I think a lot of the times you can get lost in the narrative of Elden Ring. There's definitely a amazing narrative there, but you have to kind of follow along with it, and it's very easy, I think, in some instances, to just run around aimlessly and just start killing things and leveling up and stuff without really knowing what's going on. Some of the quests in that game are exceptional. I think I think this is a God of War. I think God of War's got this one. I think the story in God of War Ragnarok is very focused. The narrative is what drives the game, and I think what makes that game. And obviously, 2018 such amazing experiences. God of War Ragnarok has got it. You have a note. I see your note here about Live Alive. I would actually put Live Alive into this conversation as well, Miles. It's not going to win, but I'd probably swap out Immortality, which I will admit I have not played, and I would put Live Alive in as the last game in that list.
Yeah, Live Alive needs to be in here because, again, those stories feel timeless. Again, the game was remade, relocalized, so I'm sure some of the dialogue has changed from the original, but the overall stories and the overarching stories in Live Alive just feel timeless, and they just resonate with the human condition and life and those profound questions that we all ask ourselves. So love that. Elden Ring, again, I don't think Elden Ring is winning this category. I'm with you.
No.
God of War, I think, will win this category for sure. Stoked to see Immortality, though. Again, I haven't played it, but it's one of those games that all of my nerdy film friends are like, dude, why haven't you played this? Why haven't you played Immortality? And I want to play it because it looks right up my alley, looks weird as hell, and it's amazing to see a unrelentlessly weird game get put into this conversation because it's important. That game is all about the narrative. It is a game. There's little gameplay at all, so it's really great to see that in there. The Elden Ring conversation, I understand we all have different preferences, so I'm not going to fault you if you didn't connect or like the narrative in Elden Ring. I made a meme about it online that you have to watch. Elden Ring deserves to be in the best narrative category as long as you watch 50 hours of lore videos online. Obviously a
It's
joke,
true.
but I love the world. I love games that leave me with questions. I love Scorn for that. I love Elden Ring. Elden Ring and From Software in particular, those are games that make me want to understand the world. They make me go out of my way to understand what this object means, what this item means, what this character means in a way that no other game does that. That doesn't mean there isn't a narrative. That doesn't mean there isn't a narrative, because the overarching narrative, I think, in Elden Ring is incredible and powerful and tells this complicated story of dynamics and relationships and ambitions. But that being said, it's presented in an unconventional way. God of War, very conventional in its storytelling. God of War tells you a defined story. You can get to the end. You know the things driving those characters along, why they are doing the things that they do. Elden Ring, you are the narrative. You are the one building the narrative. How you shape the world dictates what the narrative is. And then there's all of these characters and monsters and creatures that exist in this world that you're living in. And I think that's powerful as well. Just different strokes for different folks. But I think Elden Ring, as much as I connected with it, as much as it resonated with me, I don't think it's taken this category. I think that this is one category that will stop it from getting the clean sweep.
I agree.
All right, here's the big one. Here's the finale. Game of the Year. The nominees, according to the Game Awards, are A Plague Tale Requiem, Elden Ring, God of War Ragnarok, Horizon Forbidden West, Stray, and Xenoblade Chronicles 3.
Well, Miles, I will say that I predicted 5 out of the 6 of these games, including Xenoblade Chronicles 3. I had a pretty good idea that that's probably what was going to happen. It was all about the 6th game, and I see Stray made the cut, which is good. I'm happy for Stray to be in there. But I feel like that 6th slot could have been pretty much anything. I actually predicted that Grounded would make the 6th spot, but there's other really great games that have come out this year, including like Tunic, and there's some great experiences out there, right? But look, let's not mess around here. It's between 2 games. It's between Elden Ring and Ragnarok, just like many of the other categories we've currently talked about. I think the way this is a tough one to predict, because obviously God of War 2018 ended up winning on that particular year, and it's very easy to say that Ragnarok is going to sweep Game of the Year again this year. I think that Elden Ring is going to take it though. That is my pick for the Game of the Year. Like you said, Miles, it was just an amazing experience. I haven't felt the way that when I played Elden Ring about a video game in a very, very long time, where it literally just puts you into this world, and it's like, figure it out, figure out what's going on here. You're on your own now. And I just loved the discovery aspect of the game, the exploration aspect of the game, the lore in the game, the set pieces, the little side dungeons, the caves, everything about that game was just amazing. Did I want to rage quit that game 10 times? Absolutely. But I always felt like the game was always pushing you in the direction you were supposed to go into, but it didn't do it in a way where it was, you had a little mini map and a direction icon where it said, go here. It was just, you have an idea about what's next. And I just loved everything about that whole experience. It was, from start to finish, it was one of the best video games I've ever played. And it did remind me of Breath of the Wild, which was very similar when that game first came out. You exit the cave and you're in Hyrule, and it's like, what do I do? Where do I go? And there's something to be said about games like that, if they're developed and crafted in the right way, where they can be absolutely unforgettable video game experiences. So for me, Elden Ring's got it. But look, God of War could easily take it, and it wouldn't surprise me if they did. But I have Elden Ring for this one. What would I swap out? I'd probably take Stray out and maybe put Tunic in, or I'd even put Shredder's Revenge in there. Honestly, I was one of my favorite games this year. So
Yes.
let's put Shredders in there for Stray.
Love that. I'm with you. I think again, I haven't played God of War, so I'm not gonna. I have nothing negative to say about God of War. I can only speak to my experience with Elden Ring, which echoes a lot of what you said. It was one of those experiences and those moments that just reinvigorated the reason that I love gaming in a huge way.
Hmm.
It felt like playing Ocarina of Time or Symphony of the Night or some of these all-time great games for me. The games that I just didn't realize that this is how a game could make me feel. I didn't realize that this experience could exist. And From Software managed to take this obscure, niche, unconventional, hard as hell RPG and have it sell Call of Duty numbers, have it
Yep.
come out and have everyone talk about it. Everyone fixate on what this is. Have people I had people I hadn't talked to in years reach out to me and say, "Yo, are you playing Elden Ring?" And I'm like, "Oh, hell yes, I'm playing Elden Ring." And it was the conversation, and it just elevated the entire this isn't hyperbole. It elevated the entire games industry to a mainstream level in a way that we see with like Star Wars and Marvel movies. Like that was everyone was talking about Elden Ring, and that is so hard to do, and it's so hard to do with that genre. A
Hmm.
niche medieval RPG that's hard, really, really hard, and has a weird story that most people don't understand. And that was one of the best-selling games of the year, one of the best-selling games of all time, one of the highest-rated games of all time, and it's for very good reason,
Yeah.
because From Software has spent years and years cultivating, crafting this formula that people like myself have connected with and really, really enjoy, and then they took those fundamentals and brought it to an entirely new level with Elden Ring. And it's gonna sound corny, but it's one of those games that I was sad. It's one of the games where I beat the game and I felt legitimately sad that it was over.
Oh, dude, I needed to. Yeah, I was the same. Like, I couldn't really play anything after I beat the game for a while. I had to kind of detox a little bit from video games because it's such an incredible experience where if you play from start to finish, you've at least dropped 60 hours in that, and that's being very, very generous. I mean, you're doing at least 100 on your first playthrough for the most part. And when I beat that game, it was just, it was exhilarating that I beat the game because I've never beaten a From Soft game before. So that was another thing. It was a lot more accessible. I feel like to just a more
Yes.
larger audience. Yes, it's still very hard. Yes, you're going to get one shot if you attack the wrong boss. There is no easy mode, and there should never be an easy mode in these games. But it did enough to allow for even a more casual From Soft player to go back and enjoy the game and level up. Like I think the thing about Elden Ring for me was there was nothing that you couldn't defeat if you got enough levels under your belt. You could always go back and kick a monster's ass that like destroyed you earlier on, right? So for me, I think they did everything right. I think the only real negatives I had with the game was there was some performance issues, there was
Mhm.
some technical issues, there was some frame rate issues, but aside from that, I think the game was an almost flawless experience, and I think it deserves its Game of the Year
I think I
nomination, and it should win.
A lot of people talk about it being obviously one of the greatest games of all time. For me, it's my game of the decade. I can't think of another game that, even as someone who's loved Dark Souls 3, going into Elden Ring, Dark Souls 3 was what I consider to be one of the best, if not the best, action RPG.
Mhm.
From Software has mastered the world design. We talk about the way the environments make us feel in Elden Ring. I got a lot of those same feelings with Dark Souls 3. And I went into Elden Ring with high expectations, very high expectations, and somehow it managed to exceed all of them. Every
Yeah.
time, I'd like to be excited. As much as some of my expectations are unrealistic or whatever, I like to be excited about video games. And I just, have the conversation with myself and say, all right, just know, Miles, that, it might not live up to that. There's a lot of energy behind this. It might not be that. And then to have it be more than that and have it get to a new area and then get to another area and get to another area. I'm like, it's still going. We're still here. We're still in this game, in this world. And that's
Mhm.
how I felt about Elden Ring. Like every
It
moment, every area was
it
just
also made
great.
me appreciate From Soft games in a different way because I went back and I have since beaten Bloodborne. I have beaten Demon Souls now. Because before I'd always get frustrated with the games
Yeah.
because you die, you lose everything, you have to figure out how to get back and claim your souls if you had a lot of them, or you start over. And I feel like there was a lot of times where I just got frustrated with the combat, and I just kind of got bored. It's like I don't really want to do this. This is hardcore, man. I'm a casual guy, so um, I don't want to go back and play these games. But I have since gone back and played some other From games, and now I have a much more um, great appreciation of what they're doing in some of their older games. So, yep, hats off to Elden Ring. It's an absolute masterpiece. I think it is my game of the year, and man, I can't wait to see what From does next. I'm pretty psyched about the future.
The expectations for what they do next are going to be
Mm,
they're on the Bethesda Skyrim level. Like the next
yeah,
thing they do is going to have to be it's going
yeah,
to have to be something because they've sold a lot of people on their formula and their world and their style of gameplay, and now there's a lot more people watching. There were already a lot of people watching Elden Ring. Obviously, it did very well, but now they've pulled a bunch of people into that style and that world, and got to keep them hooked. So I'm really interested to see what their next project is. Um,
absolutely.
my swap, as much as I love seeing JRPG love on here with Xenoblade Chronicles 3, I am going to swap it with another JRPG that I loved, and that's Pokemon Legends Arceus. I know it was panned for looking ugly, and I don't disagree. It was a pretty ugly looking game. But the fundamental tweaks and changes to the gameplay and mobility made it so great. It wasn't fully open world, but it had open areas and being able to seamlessly transition from all your different mounts, flying, water, running, climbing. It just, the overall gameplay, the moment to moment gameplay is the best that Pokemon has ever had by a mile. And one of the best feeling open world ish games that I've played in a long time because it understood the source material and elevated the source material. And so I've been playing Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. I like it, but I'm also in the back of my mind thinking I wish this was just more of Arceus. So also, as we touched on earlier, it's hilariously janky, and there's been some bugs that are just, yeah. If you've been on Twitter, you've seen them. It's so good. MVG, that is going to do it for this week's episode of Xbox Chaturdays. I appreciate you hanging out. I appreciate you running through the Game of the Year nominee, or the Game Awards 2022 nominees with me. One more time for the amazing people hanging out with us. Where can they find you?
Yes, Miles, thanks for having me on. It was a lot of fun. I appreciate you having me on. You can find me on Twitter at ModernVintageG. As long as Twitter is still around, I'll be there. I did set up a Mastodon, but I'm not going to do any of that stuff. Just the Twitter, Modern Vintage G, and YouTube, obviously, Modern Vintage Gamer. Like I said at the start, I do one video a week on a Monday. I may drop a midweek video, depending if there's anything interesting going on in the world of video games. So check out the channel. And yeah, I'm most active on Twitter, so you can find me there.
Same. I'll be going down with the ship, on the Twitterverse. It's
Oh,
my
yeah.
favorite platform. I did set up a Mastodon as well, but I looked at it for about 5 minutes. Like, I don't want to be here.
Confusing. It's
confusing.
decentralized. It's
Yeah.
confusing. It doesn't make any sense to me.
No, you have to have different servers, and then you can't even
Yeah.
search for people by name just universally to see what servers they're on. It's a mess. But
It's weird.
that being said, appreciate you. Thanks so much for hanging out, man. And hope you have an excellent weekend, and we will catch you guys next week. Take care.